Rocks is up next on Rediscovered Movies. Hello, welcome to an episode of Rediscovered Movies. I'm your host, Nomfanelo. So, the film that I will be discussing is Rocks. Rocks is a 2019 British drama film. It is directed by Sarah Gavron, who's known for films such as Brick Lane and Suffragette. The screenplay is by Claire Wilson and Teresa Ikoko. So the film stars Bukky Bakray, Kosar Ali, and Ruby Stokes. So the film is basically about a teenage girl. She struggles to take care of her brother and herself after their mother's departure. The film premiered at the Toronto Film Festival in 2019. It was released on September 18th, 2020, in theaters in the UK. In terms of box office, it made $628,654 worldwide, according to Box Office Mojo. In terms of critical reception, on Metacritic, it has a 95 critic score and a 6.7 user score. It won 5 British Independent Film Awards, including Best British Independent Film. The film is available on demand, so check your local provider. Okay, so let's get into first discoveries. So, I attended the Toronto Film Festival in 2019, I guess the year that this movie premiered. I don't know if I heard about this movie at the time, but while I was doing research in terms of films to cover for this season, when I saw like the film online, the title online, I'm like, oh, this sounds familiar, probably because of Toronto Film Festival. So I rented the movie at the TIFF digital store, and when I watched it, I'm like, okay, like I had mixed reactions with this movie. I felt like the intentions were good in terms of what they wanted to tell with this story, but I don't know like if it paid off at the end of the day because I felt like there were some choices for me that did not make sense, which I'll get into in the Lowlights section. But I do felt that it is quite emotional with the movie, and I do appreciate that with the film, they were trying to aim for a Italian neo-realism vibe, which that reminded me of. For those of you that are not familiar, Italian neo-realism essentially was a movement decades ago. I don't remember the exact date, but essentially, with films from that movement, they focus on the working class. They use non-professional actors and filmed on location. So Bicycle Thief is a notable example from that movement. So while watching that movie with Rocks, it reminded me of Italian neorealism. So let's get into the highlights. So I enjoyed, the performances from the cast. It was quite commendable that the non-professional actors, I guess at the time, they did well, like with the material that they had, and I don't know like if the non-professional actors are pursuing acting. I know that the main actress is now an actor. Not sure about the others, but if it's something that they want to get into, why not? Because they clearly have skills while I was watching this movie. The chemistry between Rox and her friends were solid. So I don't know if they hanged out together often or if they just performed on screen. But for me, I was convinced that they were actually friends because you do see with some movies where you see people trying to be friends, you could tell right away that it's not genuine. But with this case of this movie, it was genuine. And the opening scene is an example of that because we see the girls like having fun on the roof and all that stuff. So yeah, like with their scenes together for me were solid. I enjoyed Sumaya. Sumaya, I would say, is my favorite out of the bunch because I liked how she tried to help Rox with her situation. Even though Rox, did not want to be fully transparent with her situation. And when they kind of had their argument at Sumaya's place, that was quite heartbreaking to see because, yeah, both girls were crying at the end of the day. But yeah, like it's just, I felt sorry for them because it clearly fractured the relationship. But eventually they came back around later in the film. But at that moment, it was quite heartbreaking. And another moment with them I do want to mention is when they are at the grocery store. So Sumaya is clearly concerned, but Rox is like, nope, everything's good. She's gonna come back and all that jazz. But clearly, Sumaya is not buying it, particularly when Rox tells the cashier that, oh, her mother is okay. When we all know that it's not okay. In terms of scenes, for me, that stood out when students were talking about their career choices, because it was interesting to see um, what each student wanted to do, I guess, after school. And obviously, some of them were pretty jokey about that. There was one student that seemed serious where she said she wanted to be a relationship therapist, but the other kids were teasing her. And yeah, like I would say for that student, if you want to be relationship therapist, go ahead because we do need more therapy. Also, too, for scenes, the cooking class or is it baking class? I'm not sure what it is, but essentially, where we see Roche, the new girl, she tries to join a group. They essentially reject her. Then Rox, being like the friend that she is, she welcomes Roche in, and at some point, altercation between Roche and the group that rejects her unfolds, which leads to food fight. So at the end of it, I felt sorry for everyone that got messed up that were not participating in this because if that happened to me, I would be furious. So especially like with my hair, I'm like that's a no no. But that was just a fun scene to watch. And lastly, when Rox comes back to school. So after dealing with social services towards the end, she goes back to school, which makes her uncomfortable because people are like watching her and all that stuff. But then her friends welcome her back. Now, should the friends have welcomed her back? That's that's debatable. But at the end, they're able to move past their differences and move on. Do I agree with that choice? I have not sure. I have mixed feelings on that, to be honest. But then it was just nice that, they're back together and all that stuff and they decide to gather their money, their loose change to go visit Emmanuel at a different town. So that was cool. And I would say also too as a final note, I enjoyed the relationship between Rox and Emmanuel. There may be times where Emmanuel might come off as a bit of annoying, but it didn't bother me that much. So I enjoyed their moments together that were both comedic and dramatic. Now let's get into the lowlights. So there is expression of a show and tell. This movie, however, does a lot of tell but no show. Most notably, so Rox's mom, she only appears in the one scene, the breakfast scene, and I guess there's like some cell phone footage of her with Manuel. So she apparently disappeared multiple times. We don't know why. And honestly, watching that for the first time made me think, oh, is she a neglected mother or neglectful? I can't come up with words today. Neglectful mother. Like she just, was just frustrated and decided to take vacation. But then it turns out that apparently the mother is dealing with mental health issues, according to the social worker, which I'm just like, well, whoa, where did this come from? Because we didn't see the mother experiencing that on screen. Because if that were the case, why not just have the mother be a bit off during that breakfast scene? I just did not get that, because if they wanted to make that part convincing, I would have had Rox like just been skeptical, like be more observant of the mother's actions. But then the mom like could be annoyed, saying like, "Oh, leave me alone. Like I'm fine. Like go to school or whatever." But yeah, it's just how they went about in this movie. I would have not been convinced that the mother was going through those issues. And let's go on with Rox's motivation. So I didn't mind the actress playing Rox and all that stuff, but some of the choices that the character makes for me were questionable. So Rox was not too worried about her mother disappearing, even though the mother has done it multiple times before. But then once when everything gets shut down at her place, clearly the situation is worse than it was before. And the way she goes about it is questionable, because she goes, stays at various places, she skips school, and just wondering, like, what are you doing? Like, maybe, like, she's supposed to be confused and all this stuff. And I would get that if this was the first time that Rox was doing this. But the fact that this has been done before, I don't, I don't get it. Because honestly, like Rox, I don't know, like if she, was afraid of telling anybody or she was embarrassed by the whole situation. That was unclear to me. I felt like Rox could have explained her position when she reunited with the friends towards the end, where she wanted to make up with the friends and all that. But it seems like, oh, they just forget about everything and we move on. So I felt, I don't know, because if Rox was not going to ask anybody for help, she could have come up with a plan herself, even though the plan might not have been the right plan, but at least she came up with something to help her and Emmanuel get by. Because since Rox is into makeup, she could have get some gigs doing makeup, where maybe she gets a lot of money from clients, maybe sketchy clients, but at least it's money. I don't know. And also the fact too that Rock stole Roche's money. It's like, why? And you just befriended the girl and you stole her money just to stay at a hotel. Like, are you for real, Rox? Like, come on. Like, I felt more sorry for Roche than Rox. And yeah, like and Roche essentially goes off, like when she gets into altercation with Sumaya, and then she posts online, "Oh, don't trust rocks," and with her photo and all that stuff. So I just did not get what Rox was doing with all that stuff. And then it's funny that after the Roche moment, Roche disappears from the rest of the movie, where she apparently went off to a different school. Hilarious. Um, and then also I wondered with the mother, like, why did she disappear? Because we see she left a chicken scratch note, essentially, that shows, oh, she's clearing her head, and then she included some money. We're like, okay, but then we're just wondering, like, oh, again, back to what I was saying before, like, was she being a neglectful parent? It doesn't seem like the case, at least according to Rox, but we have no evidence of that. But again, going back to, apparently social workers say she was dealing with mental health issues. I'm like, I didn't buy that choice, and they said that at the end. But honestly, yeah, they could have shown those moments, like, but didn't happen. And Also, too, when Rox tells her grandmother, no, sorry, when the grandmother tells Rox that her mom is not fit for motherhood, which offends Rox. I just wondered, like, what did the mother mean? Like, does the mother know that, did the grandmother know that the mother is dealing with mental health issues? We don't know. Because that comment just came out of nowhere, but I don't know. And lastly, I felt like the friends could have been used more, especially given when they're all over like the promo materials for this movie. Because how like I would choose to go about it is that with the opening scene, maybe like through all cell phone footage, the friends could be like promise each other like, hey, like we'll be there no matter what happens. We'll always be there for each other. We'll support each other, all that stuff. But then when Rox decides to go off on her own, Rox could have abandoned that promise because I don't know, either embarrassment or something. But then and then maybe the friends like, hey, like we'll be there for you and all that stuff. But yeah, that's all what I have to say for this section. Let's get on to the trivia section. So I couldn't find much on IMDb, so I was able to find um, this article on IndieWire was titled "How BAFTA nominee Rocks Became a Groundbreaking Vision of Black Girls Coming of Age." I'll put the link in the description for you guys to check out. So the producer, Fable Pictures, Faye Ward, she wanted to create a production from the ground up. So she enlisted Teresa Ikoko after watching her play Girls and paired her with Claire Wilson to write the screenplay. So the writers and casting directors, they spent time at schools and youth clubs to meet teen girls from all backgrounds. Ikoko says, "We were just doing workshops and talking about girlhood, what it is to be able to be a woman, to be a young woman, to be a girl, sharing our experiences." So, casting, they met with 1,500 women, young women, and then it got down to 60. Where Ikoko says, since it was such a long period of time, people were dropping out and obviously finding other commitments and other interests. So eventually the group was formed after 9 months, which as non-professional actors, as you've seen in the movie. So the crew was 75% female. I mean, which is nice. So Wilson says, being around that many women trying to do something together was special. It was challenging, obviously, but it also gave us a voice in the industry. Up until that moment, I hadn't been in that space before. You often don't realize how much you've been suppressing yourself until you're given space to open up. And lastly, Ikoko and others in the production, they established an organization called Bridge to support emerging talent in creating sustainable careers in entertainment, as well as providing assistance to communities and schools to make arts and culture more accessible for young people to freely participate in life-changing experiences. Where she says, quote, "We wanted Rocks to be impactful on screen, but we also wanted it to be impactful in the industry, behind the scenes, and to demonstrate that you can give autonomy and authority and ownership to storytellers that look different and were not risk. We don't only need support, we need space," which is nice. And if you want to take a look at these interviews, the article will be in the description. So, lastly, should this movie be rediscovered? I say, why not? If this is the type of movie that you enjoy, I'm sure you'll enjoy this movie as well too. For me, it didn't quite work as a whole, but I do appreciate the effort that they tried to do with the storytelling and hiring the non-professional actors. I appreciate that stuff, and it is quite emotional to watch at times. So but otherwise, yeah, like, I mean, it's okay. I mean, it's not for me personally, but like I said, if you love these types of movies, I say I'd recommend it to you on that front. So that pretty much concludes this episode of the podcast. So you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Linktree at Nomfanelo. You can find the podcast on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and Linktree at RD Movies Pod. On Spotify, you can answer the feature question, poll, and rate the podcast. For Apple Podcasts, you could leave a review and rate the podcast. You can submit questions, comments, suggestions by email, which is rediscoveredmovies@gmail.com, or you can send a short voice message on Spotify for podcasters at RD Movies Pod to be featured on the after show, which will air after season finale. All the links to the stuff will be available in the description. So I want to say thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode of the podcast, and I'll catch you on the next one.